Well, it's a new month, which means another worst to best. I love doing this, you guys love watching it, and I get spammed with all the different bands that I need to cover on this series. I decided to cover bands and artists that aren't regularly putting out music, or I can't see them putting out any more music. I think that makes sense. And so when I was kind of racking my brain of another artist to cover, I wanted to do something a little bit more contemporary, a little bit newer. And why not cover one of my all-time favorite bands of Beardfish? So that's what we're covering today. A little bit of history from Beardfish. They formed in 2001 and put out their first album in 2003. It was a conglomeration of David Zacharyson, who was the main guitarist, as well as Rickard Solblom, who has gone on to great critical acclaim. He was the main singer, guitarist, and keyboardist, and Rickard has gone on to join Big Big Train and do his whole Gunfly. So from that, we have 8 albums from the Swedish group, and so I love Beardfish. It shouldn't come as a surprise. I'm doing a whole worst to best of them. What I love is that no album from them is bad. I mean, they have 8, and it is a solid 8 albums. Now, obviously, I'm doing a worst to best, so some albums are better than others, but there's really no album on here that I wouldn't listen to and fully enjoy. I love their quirky atmosphere. I love the fact that they really don't sound like any of their contemporaries. They have such a optimistic, quirky approach to music that I feel like no other real band is employing. And unlike a lot of Swedish kind of retro prog groups, they're not trying to recapture anything from the past. If anything, they saw what the past was doing and then moved the music forward in that sense. So they're a perfect marriage of my two ideologies when it comes to progressive rock, in either recapturing what was being done in the 70s in the heyday of progressive rock, as well as moving the music forward so that they're not just a carbon copy of what they were doing in the 70s. Let's talk about Beardfish. And I guess before we do, the usual MO, I'm only looking at studio releases because they haven't really released any live performances. So I don't have to worry about that. There's no compilations. It's only studio releases, no EPs. The other one is, obviously, this is my own personal opinion. I'm not saying that the first one I'm going to be talking about is the absolute worst. I'm not saying that the last one I'm talking about is the absolute best. I'm just saying that if all the albums were there in front of me, which one would I grab first and which one would I grab last? And that's kind of what it comes out to. It's my own personal opinion. Everybody's list is different. And one of the main reasons why I love doing this is seeing how you guys kind of rank the albums of these artists. So it's all about sharing. It's all about sharing ideas. But yeah, if you don't agree with my list, then you're completely wrong. Oh boy. All right. So 8 albums. Let's dive in to number 8. There's something wrong with my eyes. The Void, released in 2012. So a lot of people are going to be scratching their heads with why I put The Void at being the least best Beardfish album. And as I mentioned, there are no bad Beardfish albums. And I know The Void, for a lot of people, is their favorite album. And I can totally see why. It is by far the heaviest, the more metal-infused of all of them. It even has my man, Andy Tillison from The Tangent, being one of the main narrators to open up this album. My main issue with this album is the band tried something new. They tried to reinvent themselves. You know, 2012 was a darker year for music, and I feel like instead of doing their own thing, they tried to really subscribe to the musical landscape that was around them, and I don't know if it quite worked. It's still great, and I still love the heavier overtones and the heavier drives within this, but it did sacrifice a little bit of the real special quality that I loved about Beardfish. Now that's still there, but it is more on the sparing side. Yeah, that's kind of why I have The Void at being my least favorite album. It's still one that I fully enjoy, and I'll get into a mood where I'm like, oh man, I gotta have me some Void. I love that darker, that heavier approach. But yeah, it's not quite my favorite. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Number 7. Oh, man! Fran in Place du Il Cancy. Oh boy, I hope I got that one right. Released in 2003. All right, so this is their first album, the album that kicked off their whole career. The main reason why I have this one being so high on the list is there's still a lot of growing pains. They're still very, very fresh and very, very young. I love Rickard's voice on this album, though. When we have that soaring vocal works right at the beginning, I just love it. Like, his ability to sing on this is brilliant, and I love his ability to do this. The only issue, though, is that outside of those few sparing moments, there's not a whole lot to really look forward to on this album. I do like that they're starting to really find out who they are, but they haven't quite figured that out yet. And that's kind of why I put this album where it is. There are still a lot of really, really tasty tracks on here. Like the first track and the last track are beautiful. It's just kind of the tracks that are around it. I feel like they're really, I don't know, they have some growing to do within this particular work, and they're not quite finished yet. So that's kind of why I have the first album where it is. It's not their worst, but it's not definitely their best, and not where I would start if I were to introduce somebody to Beardfish. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Number 6. Mammoth, released in 2011. All right, so we're kind of bouncing around a little bit into their whole discography. Every album from this point on has a moment on the album that just makes me gush, that just has this, the heavens open up and the angels come down moment. And this album has 2 of those moments. The first one is that big Goliath, that big Mammoth track of "And the Stone Said If I Could Speak" at the 15 minutes. Damn, I love where they are able to bring the music within these 15 minutes. A brilliant, brilliant track and a brilliant staple of progressive rock. But honestly, the last one is Without Saying Anything, featuring the ventriloquist. Damn, this 8 minutes is just brilliant. Like, I love that. Like, that blending and that just pump up the jam moment, I gush whenever I hear that, and I just can't help but turn the volume to 11 and practically bounce around the room as I'm listening to this. The rest of the tracks, though, on this album are kind of hit and miss. I'm not a whole fan of a lot of those other tracks. I mean, they're still good. It's just the peaks that they had reached with "And the Stone Said," as well as "Without Saying Anything." I also love how there's a little bit of a blending there. And I also love kind of how jazzy this album feels a little bit. I mean, not quite as jazzy as the previous album of, anyway, we'll get to that one in a second. But it just has, I don't know, it doesn't have a whole lot of perch, if you know what I mean. So yeah, that's why Mammoth is where it is. It's still a fantastic output, but again, not really my favorite. So let's move on to the next one. Number 5. Destined Solitaire, released in 2009. All right, so this one is another one of their concept albums. They've released quite a number of concept albums. I think at this point, most of their albums are concept albums, but this one actually follows like a cohesive storyline from start to finish, as opposed to having an idea and really following it through with that type of an idea. Now, the main reason why I have this at number 5 is Coupe de Grace. Coupe de Grace might be my favorite track of Beardfish. It's one of their instrumental pieces, and holy geez, that big crescendo at the end just makes me gush. It is just so heavenly, and the whole album in my mind is a working towards this moment, and the music that we have around it is quite stellar. The only drawback that I'd have to this album is that it is on the long side. It is quite a long album at 77 minutes, or at least just under 77 minutes. It's a lot. It is a lot of music, and sometimes it's brilliant and I love it, and other times I'm like, oh boy, where are you guys going? I mean, we've got, 3 tracks that are over 10 minutes, another one that's in 8 minutes, 2 that are in 9 minutes. There's a lot. There is a lot of music on this, and when it hits hard. But when it doesn't hit, it's a little bit of a slog. So that's kind of what edged it over Mammoth, because of those moments that really, really hit hard, hit so friggin' hard. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Destined Solitaire. On to the next one. Number 4. The Same Day, released in 2005. All right, their sophomore album, the big double discer. This album is brilliant, and there are a lot of moments on this album that really shows the growth that they had from their first album. I love so many moments on this album. It is a slog. Taking a little pumpkin spice latte break because I'm a basic bitch. Yeah, it's almost 2 hours long, and so there is quite a bit of music on this, but I love the ebb and flow. I love that even when we come into the very last track at being like almost like just over 9 minutes, we're still entertained. We're still enjoying the music that's going around it. And that's really something to say after so much music that came before it. I also love the Gooberville kind of mythos that we have on The Same Day. It kind of comes in and out, and it is reprised on Sleeping in Traffic Volume 2. But yeah, I really do love where this album goes and the ebbs and flows of this album. I do think it is a little bit on the long side. I think a few of these tracks could have been cut and we wouldn't have lost too much. But overall, the presentation and the execution of this album was really something to be praised, and one that I still get quite a bit of enjoyment out of, considering how long ago it was released, as well as the runtime. So you got to be doing something right to hold my attention for as long as you do for this individual album. So yeah, if you haven't checked out The Same Day yet, definitely go out and check it out because it is quite the treat. All right, we're kind of rounding off and we're getting into the final three. So let's find out what the final three are. Number 3. Sleeping in Traffic, Part 1, released in 2007. So this album is an interesting one because much like Destined Solitaire, there's only like 1 or 2 moments on this album that I love. The main one is Roulette. Roulette just still blows me away, and I can't believe what they're doing with music in this one, especially when they have that bounce, 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 ba-da-down, bounce, bounce, bounce. And then in and around that, we have this brilliant overlay of keyboards that are like... I can't do it justice. But yeah, I love all of that. And I also love how it is kind of a little bit of a continuation of On the Same Day, with the first track being On the Verge of Sanity. And then we get right into Sunrise. And this will kind of continue on with Part 2, again, which we'll get in a second. And I'm just loving where all these tracks and songs go. At no point do I ever feel like it's overstayed its welcome. At no point do I feel like it's too much. And yeah, the only thing that I really have to say about this is outside of that one moment from Roulette, there's not a whole lot to really write home about outside of just being fantastic and brilliant music. The main thing that I love about this album is that it's a very well-rounded and cohesive whole of a track and an album. But that's kind of where I'm at for this one. So it's on their better side, and honestly, if you start here for a Beardfish introduction, you're not going to be disappointed and you're going to be hungry for more. So yeah, this one was a fantastic work, but we're getting into the final 2 now. So once I tell you what number 2 is, you know through process of elimination what number 1 is. So let's talk about number 2. Give me back the time I spent on hunting you down. Sleeping in Traffic Part 2, released in 2008. Oh man, this was hard. This was hard. Like, even to the point where I'm recording this, I didn't know which one was going to take number 1 because like these last 2 albums fluctuate so much, and depending on when you ask me, either one could overtake the other. And it's just so hard for me to really nail down which one I like more and which one I would go to first. But Sleeping in Traffic Part 2 is just so good. It really is. Each of these songs are just bangers. The only ones that I have a little bit of a issue with is Cash Flow and the Downward Spiral and Chimay. These 2 tracks I feel are I don't know, I just don't get a whole lot out of it. Like, they're still good, and I actually do like the fun atmosphere and the quirky aspect of cash flow. But yeah, the Downward Spiral and Chimney is fine, but it's nowhere near Into the Night and the Hunter, which are just such banger tracks. And I love how when we get into the Hunter, it's got this really bouncy groove. And I love that groove. And South of the Border is a brilliant little Frank Zappa-esque type of a track. I love the messaging that's behind this. I love the whole embrace your true self. And at no point, even though the subject matter on here is quite comical, at no point do they ever poke fun of that type of lifestyle. And that's what I really appreciate. They could have leaned into it and poked fun at it, and they're more of poking fun of the situation rather than what's going on. So that's what I really appreciate, and I love the story behind it. But really, we have to talk about Sleeping in Traffic, the title track of these two tracks. I love this track. This one is a staple of the big epic pieces at 35 minutes. Man, when they reintroduce that main theme from the beginning where they're saying, me is my own worst enemy, damn, I get so emotional, and I have to close my eyes and just like, when they get to that big play out at the end. It's such a rewarding listen, and at no point in this 35 stretch of time do I ever feel bored, do I ever feel like they're wasting moments or wasting spaces, which is really something to do for an like a 35-minute track. So yeah, Sleeping in Traffic, the title track, is just dripping with joy, and I can't help but gush every time that I talk about this album. And this is usually one of the first albums that I recommend to somebody that doesn't quite know or get what progressive rock is all about. So this is a fantastic modern and contemporary progressive rock outfit that I cannot help but love. But we have one more album to talk about. So let's talk about my favorite Beardfish album with number 1. Plus 4626 minus Comfort Zone, released in 2015. The final release, the last album. They went out with a bang with this particular album, and I love this album. It was the number 1 album of 2015 for me for very good reasons. The entire album overall is a perfectly orchestrated and constructed album, more so than any other album in their discography. I love how they have the One Inside Suite kind of structuring this album with parts 1, 2, and 3, opening being a midpoint and closing the album off. I love each of the individual tracks. Hold On is so heart-wrenching and beautiful. I love the title track of Comfort Zone. It feels very similar to a King Crimson meets ABBA. I know that sounds a little strange, but it has like the King Crimson Starless guitar riff in it practically, and it also has this kind of slower ABBA harmonizations around it. Can You See Me Now and King are really fun bangers. Like, these guys really ground the album off after such ethereal tracks that was Hold On and Comfort Zone. I also love how raw and how energetic Daughter Whore is, and the dichotomy between the two. I love the huge epic tales that is If We Must Be Apart and Ode to the Rock and Roller. These two tracks just take you for a journey, and I love where each of these tracks really brings the music. Brilliant stuff. And I love the overall concept of this album too, in each one being a struggle to remove yourself from your comfort zone, whether that be a physical place where you just feel safe and you stagnate, or if it's more of a mental state and you're too scared to try something new. And I love how each of these tracks really blend themselves and showcase the dangers of being too far stuck in a comfort zone. So yeah, overall, like, now that I'm thinking about it and talking about it, it's no wonder that Comfort Zone is my all-time favorite album from them, especially with how meaningful it is to me personally. And so that's why it's my favorite Beardfish album. It might change tomorrow. Like, if you ask me tomorrow, I might say Sleeping in Traffic Part 2, but as it is right now, Comfort Zone is my favorite. I just love how they went out was such a banger. It grieves me to think about all the music that we could be missing out on. But we do have Rickard Solblum's Gungfly, as well as his work with the Big Big Train. So I'm not too disappointed in that sense. But there's my list. There's all 8 albums rated from worst to best. What did you guys think? What's your own rating? How am I wrong? Let me know about all that by commenting down below. And if you haven't already, check out my podcast. Maybe one day I'll subject one of my friends to Beardfish. So go and check it out. It's Quid Prog Quo, wherever you can find your podcasts. Thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I've been having a blast with these, and I hope to continue them on. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you guys for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. Until next time, notes out.